Awesome. All right.
Hi, everyone.
Yes.
Wonderful. Hi, Tiffany. Thank you for introducing us. Is Usha also highlighted?
Yes. 1 second.
Thank you. In the meanwhile, I can say my thanks because I think no one got as much airtime as me today. So I'll use some of the time to say thank you to the many people who made the summer experience possible. Thank you, Tiffany, and your colleagues at the Duke-Margolis Center for Health Policy for organizing this program. I'm grateful to my mentors from my research project in family caregiving policy that I focused on over the summer, Megan Shepherd-Bennigan, Amy Clark, and Abigail Shapiro, all of whom are here today, which means a lot to me. And special thanks to Cameron Code at the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers, who put me in touch with my wonderful Fireside Chat partner today, Usha Tavari. Usha Tavari was born and raised in Orlando, Florida. She is a constituent advocate and community engager with over 15 years of experience working for elected officials. In 2019, Usha was named Orlando Magazine's Orlando's Woman of the Year for her advocacy efforts. And in 2022, she was the recipient of the Orange County Distinguished Asian American Award. In her spare time, on top of all of this, Usha devotes herself to advancing Alzheimer's and dementia awareness at the grassroots level in her community. And earlier this year, she hosted and planned a global virtual summit called Let's Talk Dementia and Caregiving, #SouthAsiansSpeak. She serves as an Alzheimer's congressional ambassador and is actively involved with the Greater Orlando Walk to End Alzheimer's. And if after this presentation you want to follow her work, you can do so on Instagram and her podcast, both of which are called The Indian Caregiver. Thank you so much, Usha, for joining us today.
Thank you, Meyra, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So we thought we should start with the sharing stories part of today's Fireside Chat, where I was just wondering whether you could provide a brief overview of your caregiving journey as a caregiver for a parent with dementia.
Yes, I was my mom's sole caregiver. My mom was diagnosed with dementia, and she just passed away 7 months ago from end-stage dementia. So I was her caregiver for several years. The journey has been very unique, not only as a caregiver, but leading up to it, because I never thought that I would be in the situation as a caregiver. My father was a physician. He suddenly passed away about 22 years ago. And after he passed away, my mom was fine, and then a year later she started to develop, some neurological issues. And at first we thought they were mental health. After my father passed away, depression, she was displaying some schizophrenia, and it was getting to be pretty out of control. She was on and off of meds. But, fast forward a few years, she ended up in the emergency room. She had a fall, she blanked out. And when they saw her MRI scans, they indicated that she has dementia. So that's when my caregiving journey began, and it kind of explained her behavior prior to that. And, it was a very difficult, challenging journey, but yet the most rewarding, because I had the opportunity to take care of my mom while caring for her. I also worked full time. I managed 2 departments. I work in local government, and that was a challenge because you would have a lot of sleepless nights and caring. I was a constant stress mode with my mom. So balancing that was quite a juggling act, and getting her, to the to physicians' offices. But I think, through the caregiving journey, it was an eye-opener because I learned a lot about dementia. Despite my brother being a physician and my father, I was not familiar. I was more familiar with GI and cardiac terms, and I really is fascinating how the brain affects the body and how it leads to a lot of misconceptions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Usha, for sharing. I think it's very valuable when working in policy to always remind ourselves of the individual stories of the people that we're creating policy for. So I really appreciate you sharing your own story with the audience today. And you already mentioned that it was challenging, but also an eye-opener and also rewarding. So can you share first what perhaps the unique challenges are that you and perhaps other South Asian caregivers in the US faced?
Yeah, there are a lot of unique challenges that come to mind. I think the first is the lack of understanding. When my mom was diagnosed, she had a very flourishing lifestyle as well as social circle, and that came all crashing down. A lot of people in the Indian culture, South Asian culture, there's not a word for dementia. So, the word is pagal, which means crazy. So it alludes to mental health. So that was a huge cultural barrier, is trying to explain what I was experiencing as a caregiver, what my mom was going through, because, at that time, about 7 to 10 years ago, it was not as common as it is now. So I would say, that was a huge cultural barrier. I think another challenge for me is that my family, majority of them live overseas. I have a brother who is in Tampa, but this journey, I took it on upon myself. So there was challenges in communication with family. If I needed help or to talk to them, what I was experiencing, they would be like, oh, just make sure she takes her medication. Everything will be fine. They did not realize, there's no cure, for Alzheimer's, dementia. I think another challenge in our culture is, especially with our parents, that they do not like to go regularly to see the doctors. When my father was alive, he was a physician, so my mom would go once in a while. And then there was a gap of several years where she just refused to go to the doctor for follow-ups. So I think, her condition was brewing. And unfortunately, we caught it at a, latter stage. There are a lot of questions. Had she gone to the doctor on an annual basis? Would things have been different? But that's another challenge I see, is that the older generation and, a lot of people just don't like to go to the doctor. So I think, that emphasizes the importance of, annual physicals. And if something is not right, to dig deep and, to see the physicians on a regular basis. I think also it's important, not only in the South Asian culture, but generally speaking, you have to have an open mind and be willing to understand and show, some form of compassion when dealing with this disease, not only for the patient, but for the caregiver as well.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing. And I think this is all very topical because some of my colleagues in the internship experience earlier today shared about some of the things that you mentioned, like a lack of trust and how that impedes care. So yeah, I think these things all come together. Relatedly, I was wondering whether you can share some common stressors for South Asian caregivers, because in our research project this summer, we have been looking at the experiences of caregivers, what is stressful for them and what is rewarding. So are you able to share about stressors, but also sources of joy and perhaps resilience in your caregiving journey?
Yeah, every day was stress. And, everyone's like, take it one day at a time. For me as a caregiver, my motto was take it an hour by hour, if not, minute by minute, because it's very unpredictable. But, the first and foremost stressor for me was working full time, because I did not quit my job. I tried my best to juggle everything to the best of my ability. So, there were sleepless nights. So it was important for me to focus on my self-care as a caregiver, because if I'm not sick, I naturally did not have anyone else to come and help. Along with that stressor being alone and is financial, is that I had to make financial arrangements, out of my savings account, or, money I could be saving for retirement would go towards having someone at my place while I was working, just to make sure my mom does not fall, or that there are no issues, or she's not running off. So, that was a huge stressor that even in a post-caregiving world, I still feel it, the financial strain. The second thing is that with dementia, my mom was not able to walk on her own. So she had to give a walk. She was given a walker. And that, for several months was a challenge for me, to remind her, use your walker. And she would just, curse me out and say, this is not my friend. And she would throw it on the ground. So, from a, stressor point of view, that walking device was important, but from a cultural aspect, she just did not want to use it. She did not want to be seen, by anyone that she had a challenge, especially mobility. So that was an ongoing battle that I had with her. From a perspective, my mom was admitted to the hospital. There were a lot of cultural challenges. My mom had lived in the United States. They came in the 1970s. But there's still some values that, she held close to heart. And, one of them in a healthcare setting would be, for example, she did not feel comfortable around male nurses. Especially when they had to bathe and, that kind of intimate scene, she would go off and she would start yelling. So I would have to make a request and just say, please don't take offense to this, but it's just, she feels more comfortable in the presence of females, especially in that kind of intimate environment. Another challenge was hospital food. Everyone has dietary requirements and needs, and South Asians in general do not eat beef. My mom was a pescatarian, so it was a challenge for me when she was admitted in the hospital to say she's a pescatarian. Then they would be like, we don't have fish. Then they would give her as, no eggs, but then she wanted cheese. So then she would not eat. And then the doctors would be like, well, we need to give her Ensure to, to get her appetite going, or they would have to give her medicine to eat because they thought it was, she didn't want to eat the food, but they were cultural. She didn't want to eat, that particular thing that she was given. So, I would make lentils and rice and kind of sneak it in, and she would be happy to kind of get her spirits and her blood work up. So, those are some, cultural, some stressors that come to mind. Another thing, being in the healthcare field is that, because of HIPAA and transparency and the patient, they want to, lay everything out A to Z, which is great. But at the same time, an individual who has cognitive issues, that's not a good idea, because that creates a lot of friction with the caregiver and patient when they know exactly what's going on with the health. I think as a caregiver, I needed to have full control of the facts, because it was just me handling it. So another thing I did was I would recommend to the physician or nurse, if there is something that needs to be done or any medical exam, please let me know in advance so I can be here and guide her, especially cognitively. Or if any important decisions need to be made, can we step out of the room rather than talk in front of the patient, because that just aggravates the rapport that I have, not as a mother-daughter, but more as a caregiver-patient. So I think, despite all these, stressors, I found a lot of relief, believe it or not, just talking about my story, especially on social media. I did not realize on especially Instagram and Twitter that there is a whole community out there who can relate with what you're going through. They show videos, they have little chats, and I'm not much into social media, but I believe in this particular instance, social media is of value because other people's stories helped me. And I think by sharing my story, it opened a whole different world and made new friends, and you see things through a different lens.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing both about the stressors and the ways in which you were able to pick up moments of joy, whether it's when you have Dal with your mom in the hospital, or whether it's when talking with people on social media. To turn more to the policy oriented part of the title of the Fireside Chat today, I was wondering how we can ensure that South Asian caregivers' perspectives are well represented in health policy decision making.
I think that it's important to be open and to have an understanding. Everyone is different. Everyone has a different background. I think the willingness to be open and to share resources. I think that's something that's valuable, because it's one thing to say you've got dementia, but I think it's important that healthcare professionals also keep the open the doors for communication that, you're going on a caregiving journey. Potentially, these are the resources, whether the individual has cancer or dementia, we encourage you to use these, resources, even support groups within, whether it be South Asian. I think in this case, I think South Asians are a bit helpful because you have a common thread where you're dealing with culture, food, a lot of things. So, you can exchange ideas. Like when my mom was under home hospice, they were giving me ideas to puree the food because they were like, do this. So that was, very helpful. I think it's also important, because I didn't have a lot of these resources geared towards the South Asians. That's the reason why earlier this year I did this global virtual forum called Let's Talk Dementia and Caregiving, geared towards the South Asian community, because I just wanted to have a frank discussion, to share whether people think it's the good, bad, or ugly. And, to have experts out there is that, these are the early warning signs you may want to be mindful of. These are what we experience as caregiver. These are some resources that helped. And I think by doing that, that instigated a global conversation, where individuals reached out, and it was like a kind of like a sense of security. And people have reached out to me, on social media and saying, thank you for sharing your story. I'm embarrassed to talk about it, which I was hesitant to show videos of my mom, being challenged walking and stuff. But I'm like, it's these types of videos that are going to start the conversation where we're going to help each other. It's not going to harm anyone. But I think, the main thing is just, healthcare officials, professionals, to show that, you have our support, and these are the resources that you may want to start looking into.
Right. Thank you. And I would maybe add, if I may, that I think it's important for the policymakers to represent the diversity of the people that they make policy for. And I'm actually very glad to say that the internship cohort this year was super diverse, and there were a bunch of South Asian students, but also students of all other types of backgrounds. And at least me, it makes me optimistic that in a few years, people working on these problems on a policy level have some type of lived experience or some, more personal insight into the challenges of ethnic minorities and other groups that have traditionally been overlooked when making policy.
Yeah, I think it's also, just to add on that real quick, is there's not a one size fits all. Like, for example, when people talk Asians or, Hispanics, they think that it's a one size fits all, but every group is different. There are language barriers, cultural barriers. So I think that's important, to keep in mind. It's not a one size fits all where you just put a Band-Aid on it and it's fixed.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Thank you, Usha. Thanks for sharing. And my last question before I turn to the audience was, just because we are here together as a group that is either already working in health policy or is hoping to do so in the future. So I was wondering whether, with your experience and your expertise, if there's one thing that you want us to leave this conversation with today, what would you like to tell future health policy experts?
I think, one thing that I would love, and hopefully, other physicians would start doing it, is that, how when patients go to their doctors, you fill out the form, what your family history is. I think one area that deserves a checkbox is to ask whether you're a caregiver or not. Because, I was fortunate in my case, my primary physician was also my mom's. So he knew exactly what was going on. I got to the point when I started, the caregiving journey, my blood work was good. I have a family history of heart issues, cardiac issues. But as my journey progressed and the challenges arose, I started, I couldn't take care of myself. And I was starting, more medication was added to control my heartbeat to help me. I was getting more anxiety. I just wanted to give up. So I think it's important for healthcare officials and, potential policymakers to, keep the caregiver in mind, and maybe advocate physicians should ask that question. Like, they have the allergy stamp, allergic to steroids or prednisone, whatever it is, that way they have a gentle reminder when they see the patient that, oh yes, they're a caregiver. That's the reason why their labs could be off, or they're having some issues, because, as it is, a patient who's ill, there are a lot of resources that are used in the healthcare system, and a lot of healthcare professionals that are, sought, and that one individual gradually doubles and triples, including, the caregiver's health. I think, the last 6 months of my mom's before she passed away, I just was thinking, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get into 2022? I can't function. I'm falling apart. And, I don't have the help. So I think that's, one suggestion I have. And I just have one last suggestion is that, it's important, when physicians also, especially when their mobility and cognitive challenges, when they say that, oh, come back for blood work, or, bring her in if there's seniors are more prone to urinary infections, bring them in. They need to keep in mind that there are mobility challenges. It's not easy to, just bring the patient in when they're in a walker, and as it is, they're cognitively giving a lot of problems. So I wish that, policymakers would come up with something where physicians or physician assistants or nurses could draw blood or do simple tests at home. So that way the patient is still being taken care of, but it's a little less of a strain, for the caregiver and for the patient as well.
Usha, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for your continued advocacy work, even after the passing of your mother. And I'm so glad that your initiatives and the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers, I also just saw that Jennifer Olsen, the CEO, is also here. Everyone is here. Thank you all for coming through Exist. And we have a few minutes for a question from the audience, if there are any.
This is Sarah. I don't have a question. I see Deb does, so I'll keep my comments short. I just want to say thank you for raising this. I helped to caregive for both sets of my grandparents before they passed, and as part of a multi-team, it was incredibly complicated and just exhausting. And that what you're talking about, the caregiver's health, is just as equally as important as the person who you're caring for. So I just want to say that I appreciate all of your comments and you sharing your story today, and it just really resonated with my heart. So thank you. Dev, I believe you had a question, and Mustad.
I will defer to anyone else who has a question. I'm happy to go last.
Also, while people maybe gather.
Mustad, would you like to ask a question? Or Masood?
I think Masood's out.
Thank you,
There's
correct.
a question. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I was trying to unmute and I couldn't do it. Yeah, nice to see you, Usha. And
Nice to see you.
if it hasn't been for you, I would not be here today. I am probably in the minority today because from what I've heard, I've made quite a few notes. I'm the only one who's living with a diagnosis of dementia so far. And I have been for a long, long time, since 2010, in fact. And some of the things that Usha has touched on, I would like to just add a little bit. Traditionally, Asian people look after their elders, and they have been doing. And it's a done thing, if you like. I'm from UK, by the way. Everybody's from all over the place. And what I find through my experience that, don't get me wrong, they do a good job. But the fact is that they're not trained to care for a person. And especially with dementia, the issues change from day to day, hour to hour. And the condition changes because it's a progressive condition. And what sometimes happens is that they might be able to look after the physical needs. If the same applies to the caregiver, probably. They will be able to look after the physical needs, maybe dress them, bathe them, or whatever. Financial help maybe, but there is emotional help that's what is needed. And there are times when the person with the diagnosis is experiencing things, but he or she cannot communicate and explain that to them. And this is where somebody with that knowledge comes in. And like Usha has said, you've got culture. And within South Asian community, faith, culture, customs, language, food we eat, type of dress we wear, everything has a bearing on dementia pathways. You've got people here that are bilingual. I am as well. I speak 14 different dialects and languages. And like Usha said, there's no word for dementia in any of them. But even if you look up the word dementia in the dictionary, and I am actually disputing this word anyway, I don't think it should be called dementia because it's so closely linked with demented. People automatically assume that the person is insane. I know it's a disease of the brain, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he's lost everything. So it's something that needs to be looked at. But within the South Asian community, that is the biggest problem.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, of course, the stigma attached to it. Nobody wants to talk about it. And that applies to everybody because in all honesty, as I say, I'm the only one with the diagnosis here. Nobody really wants to talk about a condition that they know it's not curable. I am mature enough, adult enough to understand that, and I've accepted it. But the fact remains, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of courage, and a lot of thought into it before one can make any comment on this. I do apologize for taking more time, but I thought it's important that I'm talking to professionals and they need to know this, from somebody who's actually experiencing it firsthand.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Qureshi. And please, my apologies. Please do not apologize for sharing your experience. I think this is a really valuable way of wrapping up our fireside chat. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. And I think I'll hand it back to Tiffany.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that fireside chat. Like I said, I feel like it's very resonating with a lot of folks, especially me as well. So thank you so much, Meyra, for putting together. And thank you so much, Usha, for joining us and participating in the conversation and sharing your story. But with that said, that is our symposium. I'm gonna pass it to Dev to see if he has any final remarks. And these were all amazing, and I'm so glad that you all were able to present on this, on your research and all the hard work you have done the last 9 weeks right now, well, nine and a half. It's amazing work. I'm so glad to see what you all will do post our internship program. So I'm looking forward to seeing the great works that you all will do in the world.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tiffany. And thank you to all the participants in the symposium. This has probably been the fastest 2 hours I have ever experienced. If there was anything negative I could say about this is there's quite frankly not enough time to bounce through all of the breakout rooms, but I was thoroughly impressed by, well, maybe I shouldn't be impressed because we knew you were an impressive group interns when we interviewed you and brought you into the program. But I am incredibly pleased with the work product that we've seen, the kind of feedback we've received from interns. As Tiffany said, we want to have you continue to thrive professionally. One of the things that's going to really help us do that and to think about the next cohort is when you get your survey, your post internship experience survey, please take time to fill it out. I'm going to tell you right now, it's one of those that requires a lot of free comments. So it's not a bunch of radio buttons you can click or a Likert scale you can click across the board and get done in a few minutes. But if you spend some time putting that in, it'll allow us to continue to improve the program. We have also contained everything that was a tangible deliverable into a single product, which will be available. So for those of you who did not get a chance to get to as many breakout rooms as you wanted to get to, we will certainly have the ability for you to do that in an electronic format. With that, I want to say thank you again to everyone. Really, honestly, it was great to see friends and family here. We had moms and dads and brothers and sisters. Thank you, Sarah, for playing air traffic control for all the people who needed to find out where they needed to go. Maybe our America's airports can learn a little bit from the way you managed everybody in and out, and we wouldn't have the challenges we do. That being said, thank you, everyone. Continue the great work and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.